Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another LogiSYM webinar. My name is Joe Lombardo. I'm the editor of the LogiSYM magazine. And joining me also today is our president of the Logistics and Supply Chain Management Society, Dr. Ramon Krishna. And the topic of our discussion today with our guests will be people in the supply chain, training development, and their role in a post-COVID-19 world. I'm very pleased to welcome our two guests today. The first one is Dr. Shereen Nassar. Dr. Shereen Nassar, welcome to our webinar, and thank you for being with us here today at a very early hour in Dubai. I think it's about 7 o'clock in the morning, and also you are in the middle of Ramadan, which we really appreciate your effort and your sacrifice to join us. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Dr. Shereen Nassar is the Global Director of Logistics Studies and the Director of the MSc Logistics and Supply Chain Management Program at the Heriot-Watt University, Dubai. And we will be exploring more later on with her on what is going on in that part of the world. Our second guest, welcome to Rob Wisdom. Welcome, Rob. Rob is based in Singapore, so he's in the same timeline as us. Rob is a director at Ethos Beath Chapman. Rob leads the supply chain and procurement practice covering the Asia-Pacific region. Clearly, people is very important factor in our recovery in the current post-COVID scenario, but also going forward for the future. So welcome, Dr. Shereen and Rob. So Ramon, we'll kick off the webinar. I will start our guest's question. I will ask two questions. First to Dr. Shereen and then to Rob. Can you share with us a little about your background experience, briefly some of your significant achievements, and also what do you see the challenges facing your organization today? So Dr. Shereen, if you'd like to start the question.
Yeah. Thank you. So as you mentioned, I'm the Global Director of Logistics Study at Heriot-Watt, which means I'm working with the 3 campuses in Edinburgh, in Malaysia, and in Dubai. I'm also the Director of MSc Logistics and Supply Chain Management in Dubai. I started my journey with supply chain and logistics since 2007. At this time, I was doing my PhD in UK. I was working on supply chain visibility and sustainable competitive advantage. I focus on tracking technology. At this time, I worked with RFID. It was new technology at this time. So since then, I'm interested in digitization and digital supply chain. After I finished my PhD, I worked as assistant professor in operations supply chain management in MENA region and UK. So I teach the postgraduate, undergraduate in this area. I have interest in research in different areas, mainly supply chain risk and sustainability. So I have some research output in this field as well. Regarding your second question, it challenges facing organizations today. So I think most organizations, different sectors, we can say they are facing similar challenges since the factors affect business environment are same. Like for example, talking about technology, talking about competition, customer expectations. So I think this affects every organization. So if I focus, for example, on higher education, the sector I work on, I work in, I found that first factor that challenge facing us is the cost. So unsustainable cost, for example, because of the traditional method of teaching, focusing on achieving effectiveness and small number of students in a class, and the instructor may be effective way, but is not really the most efficient way. So the challenge now we face is that how to achieve the best, achieve efficiency while not sacrificing, effectiveness as well, and compromise the student experience. The second challenge would be related also to technology, educational technology. So educational technology offer new opportunities like any other sectors, and also allow us to introduce new techniques for teaching and delivery But the challenge not only to install or to use the technology, the challenge requires changing the role of the student and the faculty, and this is the most challenging part of technology for us. So this kind of disruption affecting universities as well. So the third dimension for the challenges, I would say, is just also competition. So competition across universities is an important element, and also student expectations based on the competition. So competition impact cost, and obviously not only cost in relation to tuition fees or something like this only, but also expectation from students based on like competing the facilities and infrastructure. The third factor affect also higher education institution is the increase in demand of new skills, which require higher education institution obviously to continuously update their curriculum and work closely with industry to know exactly what are the needs of industry and identify this need, translate in terms of skills, and develop this and design this in their programs and courses. I think these are the common challenges in higher education sector.
Right. You've touched several points there, which I will come back to later on, because there are some very key areas that you have highlighted, which I'd like to explore. But can I ask Rob the same question again? You know, a little bit about your background, your achievements, and what are the challenges you are seeing moving forward?
Yeah, great, thanks. So as mentioned, I'm a director at EBC, who is an executive search firm covering Asia Pacific. I'm heading up our supply chain and procurement function, where we recruit sort of mid to senior level procurement and supply chain staff across a range of industries, from consumer goods, pharmaceutical, technology, manufacturing, and logistics. I actually began my recruitment career in London, and I was working for a small boutique company supporting law enforcement and government agencies such as the Foreign Commonwealth Office and Serious Organised Crime Agency. Whilst in London, you know, I run multiple sort of national projects in supporting hiring as well as international projects, which could include with the Metropolitan Police during the London riots, the Iraq Historical Allegations Team, which is based down in Wiltshire. Also partnered with the Turks and Caicos Police Force for a corruption team over in the Caribbean. I then moved over to Singapore in 2013 and joined a large MNC, and my role there was basically to build out our supply chain organisation. So with that, you know, looking at sort of streamlining our approach to key markets, developing a strategy around industry specializations, and you know, over the time before I left there, I built that team to 6 people, which is focusing on the Singapore market only. And then about 2 years ago, I moved into EBC, which my role has been to continue the development of the Singapore desk, but also to sort of continue to build our footprint in the region and increase our partnerships with key clients, certainly for myself and within the supply chain space, sort of partnering with a lot of companies from a transformation perspective. So again, delivered on a lot of, sort of large-scale projects, not only in Singapore, but in countries such as Vietnam, Malaysia, and China as well.
Rob, what do you see the challenges as being today facing the organization? Clearly, the landscape is changing. Well, what are the challenges you see, the immediate things we should be thinking about? Yeah,
it's a good question. I mean, you know, I think generally the current recruitment climate is the biggest challenge. When a lot of people ask me about how's the market, a lot of people automatically think about employers. And of course, employers are having to, you know, review really what 2020 looks like, but also, you know, having to look at new recruitment processes as well, you know, looking at, you know, all interviews going through video conferencing, even down to the details post-offer with onboarding. You know, so it's a you know, that candidate experience or new starter experience is really important. But don't also forget the candidate market as well. There's equally uncertainty there. You know, you've got, I speak to a lot of candidates where, you know, they are actively looking for one reason or another. There may be a lack of opportunities. And I think the biggest worry in terms of moving now is this sort of mentality of, if I'm the last person to join a company, if they then have a wave of retrenchments, does that mean I'll be the first person out? So they're the two major concerns, but I think it's important to highlight clients and candidates' uncertainty are just as equal as each other.
Rob, just carrying on from that question. So, you know, and this is a question directed at Dr. Nassar, yeah? We've got candidates, we've got students coming out into the job market every other month, right? So, to Rob's point about last in, first out, do you think the expectations of students are a bit realistic? And is the academic world, do you think you're up to date with industry realities? So are you preparing candidates who are ready for jobs, and are the expectations real?
Yeah, I think the answer for your question, we can't have generic answer. It actually depends on which university you talk about, where they operate. So it depends on the level, the maturity level of their business. It depends on their reputation, their ranking. So the systems they work under and the regulations which control their process. So the answer can't be generic here. But what I can say is that it becomes an important kind of important survival action for any university or higher education institution to actually find a way to assimilate and understand industry needs and respond to these needs, and this will enhance obviously their credibility and justify their existence. But definitely there are good universities are able to work closely within industry like what we do. We coordinate and we partner. We have a strategic partnership with the industry contacts and professional bodies. We work closely to identify where are the skills needed for the job market, and we try to help our students obviously to develop these skills. I think we do lots of activities to train our students to develop these skills. For example, using different teaching techniques. We bring guest speakers from industry to our students. We do lots of activities. We have like industry week in which we invite industry people, and obviously they have direct contact with the students, and I think all opportunities with us to work with industry to narrow the gap between industry and academia in relation to skills we're working on. We have obviously our industry advisory board, so any change in development, we get the input from industry in this. So last year we introduced new courses based on these needs in business analytics and big data analytics. So they develop the skills, help students to enhance their employability and skills needed in the job market.
Rob, on that point that we just discussed in terms of employers looking at last in, first out, I mean, clearly that is an old-fashioned way of looking at things, and that's a very dangerous way to build your company. Clearly, we need to look at competencies, and as Dr. Shereen was just saying, the dialogue between industry and academia is very important. What is your experience on this in terms of this changing landscape and getting employees to actually focus on the right skills and not on a first in, first out or last in, first out basis?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, and I think that mentality, of course, has just really been brought on since COVID-19. Right. You know, if you think about you know, keeping up to date with industry realities right here, right now, you know, if 12 weeks ago I would have said that, you know, everybody is sort of worried and sort of panicking and doesn't understand, but I feel that, you know, we are moving into a new mindset with employers who are, you know, really not looking at what's happening now immediately, but it's a 2020 plan, or in fact even people planning into 2021. But I think more, if we talk sort of pre-COVID-19, you know, the last couple of years, what I've found and what I've been very busy with is a lot of supply chain professionals moving into roles which are looking at optimization, operational excellence, sort of change management, you know, and with that, it has meant that, you know, people are starting to do slightly different roles, whereas a supply chain manager a few years ago may have incorporated a little bit on continuous improvement. Those sort of roles now are a little bit more sort of focused. So, you know, I think that they're two sort of quite different things, sort of pre and current COVID-19.
But are the skills that you require in the market there? Because one of the things that I'm sure Dr. Shereen can comment on is one of our previous panel guests had highlighted purchasing procurement as one of the key strategic areas moving forward to improve supply chain, supply relationship, developing better quality, pricing, etc. Do we have those skills in the market? Are companies looking for those skills? And then we can see how academia is preparing us in that sector. What's your view on that?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think procurement has gone through a lot of transformation over the last few years, and I think the whole perception of what procurement stands for nowadays is quite different to what it was, and you know, it is sort of now perceived in a number of companies as a much more of a sort of a strategic part of the business. So I believe that, you know, there has been certainly an increase in the level of competency. I would say probably more so in the sort of the category management and the strategic sourcing side, where, you know, if you're looking at, you know, things such as procurement operations, you know, a little bit more of the perhaps sort of lower value but higher volume sort of procurement negotiations, that perhaps they're now being moved into a excellence or a shared service centre. So I think, you know, to answer your question, yes, I think there is, but there are still gaps. And as we move into a new generation of AI, automation, then there's still gaps there, because essentially there's roles that will come up in probably the not so distant future that haven't actually ever existed before. So I think that links back to the academic side, is that, you know, that learning new skills and you know, bringing these sort of people in that will do a bit of a reverse mentoring with more senior folks who haven't had that exposure to, you know, some of the technology, the digitalization, and so on.
So, Dr. Nassar, the ball has been lobbed back into your court, yes? So the question is then, how can industry participate with academia to share these industry insights to make sure that you've got job-ready people or graduates going into the job market?
Yeah, actually, to answer your question, I'll link to what Rob said, and which I agree with, actually. I'll just add one more thing. The statistics saying that most of the supply chain logistic practitioners hold undergraduate degree in economics and engineering and business administration, which means they didn't actually have the specialized knowledge in the area of supply chain and logistics. And this means they develop their knowledge based on just from their experience. So this one thing to consider. The other factor which Rob highlighted is that this supply chain and logistics field is quite rapidly evolving and continuously evolving and changing because of obviously digital disruption and issues related to globalization that affect the international trade, and different factors. Actually, we can say risk factors affecting this field as well. And the expectation becomes higher in this field and at more strategic level, moving from operational to strategic level. Regarding your point about how we get the insight from industry, this is actually what we try to do. So we find different ways to get this insight, dealing with all the stakeholders in education process. Like we work with our professional bodies to organize event. We discuss the skills needed by the job market in different areas, in procurement and logistics, and we hold the events and workshops regarding this. We invite also guest speakers, as I mentioned, so they can actually get the insight from industry. And we use, when we bring a guest speaker, for example, for a class in certain topic, we always highlight what are the skills needed. If the student want to join this field work in for example, something related to warehousing, what are the skills expected? So they are aware what they need to develop, how we can also help them to develop these skills. It's not only also working with industry at this level, we use our tools as well. So we use, for example, simulation, software simulation to put students in the real life situation of making decision as supply chain managers. So they actually practice as well. We use this experiential learning approach, so they learn by doing as well. So
I have a question for both of you, but let me ask Rob first this question, and then I'll come on to you, Dr. Shereen. From our previous webinar feedbacks, we've had some very, very specific focus points. Purchasing, which we talked about, but risk management, people management, and supply chain core skills were identified as areas of skills shortage in the market. This is clear. Do you also see this in your area, Rob? And what do you think we should be asking the academia to do more than they are now? And then I'll come on to Dr. Shereen on this question.
Yeah, I think out of all of those, including procurement and purchasing, I think, you know, probably the risk management side is perhaps an area of skills shortage, and I don't think that's something that you learn from, you know, your academic side of things. I think risk generally, you know, globally is something that seems to remain more prominent. And I think a lot of companies will sort of say that they have a very structured risk management way of operating. Especially, probably some say they have more than that they actually prioritize. Right. Of course, you know, there is a skill shortage because, again, we've gone through a bit of a transition where before, risk management wasn't really seen as a huge issue. But if you look at things, you know, you look at even just the supplier base and how many people are using those suppliers, you know, across the region, in country, it's become more and more sort of prominent. So, and I think that you can't really teach it. I think it's an awareness thing that, you know, supply chain organisations should be constantly raising awareness that this is a key part of supply chain and procurement's role.
Right. Dr. Shereen, coming back to your previous point, you talked about some of the things you're doing at the university in terms of simulation, looking at modeling, and looking at trying to create a real life scenario. How do you think we can now use what you have built in your simulation models to apply to risk management development? Because it's something, as Rob says, is not, you can't learn it from a textbook, you've got to practice it. Risk management, core skills areas, because core skills in supply chain are many. How can we do more in this area, Dr. Shereen?
Just to link also to what Rob said, which also I agree, this area of supply chain risk management rule was overlooked for a long time. Yes. And because it's the cost, to be honest, for businesses, they always want to see a return on investment. And if they invest in risk management, they don't see really the reward or the return on investment on that. And there is a survey was conducted by Apex and Supply Chain Council survey, in which they surveyed 9,000 supply chain practitioners, and 72% respondents reported that their organization didn't have a formal risk management rule or position. So that tells you how this area was really neglected. Linked to what we do at Heriot-Watt University, actually we are one of the very, very few universities that teach a course, the whole course on supply chain risk and adaptation. So we have a whole course the student study in their master's degree program in risk. So we use, obviously, in this course specifically, we mainly use this experiential learning approach. So they learn everything by doing. So they learn how to do risk registers. They learn through simulation, put them in a real life situation. So they make decisions. They see the impact of their decision on supply chain performance, on profit and loss. So I think they go through the real life situation. And definitely with the current situation with COVID-19, we are in the stage to obviously updating everything in the course to link to what's happening now.
But Dr. Shereen, one of the techniques we have used in industry is business continuity planning or disaster recovery planning, models of that nature. And again, they can be very complex and very, very important. Are you working on things like that, business continuity plans, where you have planning of breakdown, recovery, where people are engaging resources and different services? How are you addressing that in the academic world?
Actually, they work part of the course in the Ascenda projects that they work in a certain, they choose, who gives them an option to choose certain risk event, and they work around this. So they can, they work about the impact of the event, the recovery, as you mentioned, the business continuity planning related to this event. So right. they work as a group, and they go through all the aspects of risk management process, dealing with an event, with contingency plans, with mitigation plans, so propagation of the risk event. So they address different aspects of it.
Right. Okay. Thanks, Shereen. So I'm going to open questions up to the floor shortly. So if you do have a question, please either post them in the chat or raise your hand if you would like to ask them live. I see I've got one participant who'd like to ask a question. So if there's anyone else, please raise your hand. But I have a question for Dr. Nassar, yeah? So, you know, we talk about lean and agile supply chains, and that was supposed to be the panacea for supply chain success. But today, people are talking about having robust and resilient supply chains. So what's your view, and can supply chains work efficiently if we have this flip-flop in practices? Because one day we're saying A and the next day we're saying B. So should we have resilient and robust supply chains, or agile and flexible supply chains?
Okay, so let's just clarify. I'm not sure how familiar are the audience with both strategies. So lean supply chain strategy compete based on cost reduction and zero waste, and deal with more functional products with stationary demand, so predictable demand. And agile is compete based on speed and responsiveness and meeting customer expectation, short lead time, that deals with more innovative products with short product life cycle and unpredictable demand. So when we talk about resilience and risk, we see that the problem with lean, if you are extremely lean, this means, yes, you are able to reduce your cost. You deal with only one key supplier, global supplier, or you have zero stock. Yes, you reduce cost, but you reduce your resilience at the same time. So this is the disadvantage if you are extremely lean. With Agile actually is part of building resilience. To build resilience, you have to be agile. Okay, this based on being agile needs require you to be flexible. Okay, build the flexibility in your supply chain, and flexibility has two levels. So you can have a dynamic flexibility, which happening at operational level, at operations level, or you have it at more strategic level. So it's called structured flexibility, when you have flexible network design, which actually we see what we need in current this pandemic situation. You have also hybrid of both strategy. You have LogiSYM, through which you utilize the benefits of both strategies. And if you use the hybrid technique, you will need to also have what's called postponement strategy and decoupling point. And you decide ways that decoupling points the supply chain to maximize the benefits of the two approaches. So yes, we need resilience. So in current situation with COVID-19, definitely all organization needs to move toward more agility. Lean supply, as we see, actually most of the negative consequences happening now due to relying heavily on lean approach. So
Right.
most organizations need to develop more agile supply chain, more flexible supply chain, more adaptability, more alignment. So this will help more in the current scenario.
Thank you very much for that answer.
You got any other questions coming through, Ramon? I know there's a few.
Yes,
questions.
I've got quite a few. I've got one from Sanjay Desai. Sanjay, you're live. Please ask your question. And I've also got one from Tej Contractor. Tej, Sanjay, you have a question from our panelists?
Can you hear me, Ray?
Yes. Go ahead, please.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Ray and Joe. Good morning. Hey, thank you so much, Dr. Shereen, for coming in, and good to see you, Rob, on the video today. Sanjay Desai here. So my question is for you, Rob. From a recruitment and skill set perspective, over the last few years, companies have actually moved away from an end-to-end value chain role. And we are actually going very focused, demand management, supply management, logistics, and warehousing. With the need of the hour today is actually to go back to the board and work your entire supply network with whatever is happening, right? Now, with what we have done in the last 5 years, the industry going very focused roles, do you think we really have a skill set in the organization, if you leave aside the top Fortune 100 companies maybe, that we can regroup on the whiteboard and say what we need to do and actually see our supply lanes and how do we configure that? Because everybody is talking very, very openly like move out of China. And that is not going to happen. It's not just move out of China, right? There is a lot they need to do. You think, do we have the skill set? People have honed that skill set to go back to the board and say, let me do an entire finite planning of my network and see where I can distribute my eggs now. And that's the question. Joe alluded to it in the beginning.
Thank you.
And Ray actually followed it earlier.
Thank you, Sanjay. Rob, could you take that?
Yeah, thanks, Sanjay. And it's good to hear from you again. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because you used to have a supply chain manager who would be responsible for all of the cogs within a supply chain, and there are a lot of companies now that have really broken that up and made it more segmented, as a more narrow specific role. I think it's essential post COVID-19 that you have staff who are able to operate across the full supply chain. If you're talking about Fortune 500, big, large MNCs, I think it's their responsibility, in the more mid to long term, because I think the backlash of COVID-19, is going to affect businesses for a number of years. Is to, promote a lot of internal movements, broadening, higher potential candidates, broadening their skill sets and reverting back to something which is a little bit broader, because, I genuinely believe that once we do get ahead of COVID-19, a lot of companies are going to look to supply chain to get business back on track, and it will go to a little bit more of the traditional supply chain, just people who are very good at understanding demand from the market and ensuring that such products go out to market. Whereas, if you've asked me that question maybe a year ago, it was all very much sort of high level strategic thinking in supply chain. Now I think it's going to go back to I suppose the traditional way of doing supply chain, just to simply get product, fulfill orders with your customer base.
All right, thanks for that answer. Thanks for that answer.
Yeah, with one more question
Rob,
from
from Tej. Tej, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Rahman. It's a pleasure. My name is Tej Contractor from India. I'm involved with training in a small way. So the real question is that working from home has become a reality. And a lot of people, a lot of companies, especially technology and even in logistics, have started doing the same. Now, what are the measures are we taking to change the dynamics of training people in working from home? And the second is, how do you think recruitment will change? Because the traditional concept was, companies would go to a school or people would come in for an interview and then they would be monitored on the job. In the situation that we are in today, and it's not going away anytime soon, how is that going to affect the industry on whole? Thank you.
Great question, Tej. Rob, I think that's a question for you, yes?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I think from a training perspective, I think it's training and support for the workforce. We're all, adapting to what is maybe described as the new norm, and I think the best training to do it is sharing best practices across industries. I think we're in a market currently where, of course, we all have our own business operations, but I think we're all in this together, and I think sharing best practices in terms of what works well for industries and specialisms is important. How it affects the recruitment market, yes, I mean that's a big part of what my role is now, is to partner with organisations who do need to hire. Generally, the market it is quite tough out there at the moment, but you still have niche roles, critical roles, and these roles need to be hired. So I work very closely with a lot of organisations in terms of from identifying we've got a need to this person starting the job, what does that look like now? And from an interview perspective, I think we need to move away from this, sort of mindset of, it has to be in person. Of course, we all like to do our business meetings, and I'd like to do this session, in person, standing in front of the audience. But really, that's not going to happen, and that's not going to happen anytime soon, despite even guidance from the government or governments. Companies can still probably edge on the side of caution, rather than just trying to encourage lots of people into the office. So the next best thing is videos, and what I'm finding is you'll have panels of interviews. And going on to the offer aspect and onboarding, I've worked with a lot of companies who very highly value the onboarding process for their staff. And to be quite honest, in my experience, when you start a new job, you'll always remember your first week or your first 2 weeks where you were onboarded. So a lot of companies are tailoring onboarding processes to accommodate certain individuals for certain roles. So I think it's still, we've all been dropped in, and it's been quite a steep learning curve, but it's just that visibility piece, as much as you can do outside of being able to shake that person's hand in person and walk them around the office.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, Rob, for that question.
Yeah, thanks for the questions, guys. I want to move on to the current disruption. Currently, we are facing this COVID-19 disruption, and there are several concerns about getting out of this lockdown, getting to the new normal, getting to where we're trying to go, and no one knows exactly where we're going. I'd like to start off with some comments that Dr. Shereen has mentioned earlier on. The crisis has caught many of us by surprise, companies, everybody by surprise. And what you just talked about, Rob, is going back to maybe traditional supply chain methodologies. But Dr. Shereen touched on something very important. Methodologies in our supply chain are very crucial. Choosing one methodology of another is not the time to make a choice. And Dr. Shereen, you talked about hybrid choices. You talked about optimization of methodologies. Do you think we should do more of that promotion now and say, no, we can't fall back to traditional, we need to move forward to advance our thinking, advance the methodologies that will make us move in the right direction? What is your view about really driving these methodologies?
I think is a part of this resilience concept. So building this resilience actually is part of everything what we do. So we learn. It's actually we are going through learning process. Not everything you are facing now is really negative. There are many opportunities of this. I was part of the panel interview for procurement position, and I before the lockdown I had in-person interview, and I had the experience using online interview. So I don't see really the big difference. Actually, I see the advantage that if you can interview someone in another country without the hassle of traveling and the cost, so there are still opportunities and advantage. So you find the best way to do things and share best practices. So I believe things will not go back like business as usual. We are not going back to this again. I think we learn from what we do. There is element of innovation also in what we do, how to maximize the opportunities you have in the current situation. And I think what we are seeing in higher education system, that we found things that we think we need to make use or maximize the benefits of the current situation at more strategic level. Yes, we are now having our contingency plan, but we also think this could be also opportunity for development or improvement on whatever we do.
Dr. Shereen, one point I want to bring to the discussion, and we talk about methodologies, we talk about processes, we talk about the past, but one thing we don't talk about is change in mindset. And that is one of the fundamental barriers to move us forward. How would you address this from an academic point of view, or help industry to bridge the gap between changing the mindset to adapt to the new normal or to the new requirements?
Actually, this is the most challenging part of any change. But I think my view is because of COVID-19 actually doesn't give anyone a chance to think what to do. So it's not actually, we can see this resistance to change or will be same, because people have to do it this way. There is no other option to do it. So they have to adapt to what is happening now. So there is no choice. Like I can like reflect on maybe in universities when we had to stop like suddenly and move to online teaching, like just in like 48 hours to move to differences. At this point, if you have like 2 weeks left in the semester, you don't have really to take the hassle to learn new things, how to do things. But if you start a whole new semester and you are forced to use these tools, you have to learn. So I think people will adapt to whatever to a situation, whatever requirement, if it's the only option. And even if it's not the only option, they will still, maybe management, if they see the benefit of it, they still try to do this through training, through workshops, so through like sharing best practices, even like with colleagues, like helping each other. So there are different ways of also improving this or overcome this challenge.
A quick follow-up on that question: who should lead this initiative? And there's a question for you, Dr. Shereen, very quickly, and Rob also very quickly. Who should lead these initiatives moving forward?
It should come of this. It needs to have management support. Okay, and at the same time, this should be part of the change in the organizational culture at the same time. Right. So I think also at this time, I think employee empowerment is very important. Right. Let them also make decisions and be part of the decision. And at this time, they will be responsible and they will contribute like voluntarily without feeling that they are forced to do something.
Right. Right, Rob, your view on this? Who should lead it?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I think it needs to be led from the top. I think a good way to help change mindset, and I think something that perhaps a lot of companies are looking at now is having a clear supply chain strategy. You know, as I said, I think, you know, we're in a time now where there's a realization that COVID-19 is going to be around for a while. And I think it's the responsibilities of supply chain leaders to roll out a clear supply chain strategy, you know, which would include, I think, you know, extensive collaboration across the different parts of supply chain to ensure high levels of connectivity and visibility across the supply chain.
Okay, great.
Okay,
Thank you.
You know, we are approaching the end of our webinar. We still have a lot of good questions. So I'll leave it to Joe to decide whether or not we want to continue. But a question to both the panelists, and we'll keep this short so that we can try and answer other questions that we have coming in.
Right.
Where would you see the big vulnerabilities in supply chain management, and what do you see as the mitigating actions required to ensure supply chain stability? And this is asked in the context of COVID-19, right? I don't believe it's the new normal. I don't like that phrase, because if you're a real supply chain practitioner, the new normal happens every day. But in these times of instability and change, what actions are required to ensure our supply chain stability moving forward? Rob and Shereen.
So if I look at the vulnerabilities that we see now in supply chain with COVID-19, I think the source of vulnerability will be the first thing is globalization and integrated supply chain, which means supply chain implications not only go beyond go beyond regional concern, it's also global. So we see travel restriction, shortage in labor and materials, as well as logistical challenges through tightened controls and closure of ports and hubs are cascading and augmenting the impact of COVID-19 more. Also, poor flexibility in the network design increase that logistical challenges as well. So we see long lead times, unreliable delivery, high rates and capacity constraints. Also poor supplier support during the crisis. So we see actually poor practice of CSR, corporate social responsibility during the crisis. So if they claim at the normal situations, they are really doing this CSR. We don't see this happening in many organizations, big
Right.
organizations. Also poor peer-supplier relationship beyond the tier one. Lack of robust digital supply chain infrastructure and application causing also poor visibility and other sources of risk. As I mentioned before, extreme lean strategy, sacrificing resilience. So I think these are the main source of vulnerability in current scenario. So how to deal with this situation? I think we passed the period of short term. We are now more in the middle term action. So I think organizations and our supply chain need to focus more on trying to balance supply and demand, as well as building buffer stock and try to assess opportunities to diversify the supplier ecosystem and review or create the organization's overall risk management approach. Also working with internal stakeholders and strategic and critical suppliers to establish a congruent risk management approach to monitor and prepare for potential material and manufacturing capacity shortage.
Right. Thanks, Shereen. What about yourself, Rob?
Yeah, I'd agree with absolutely everything that Shereen said. You know, I think that you know, companies do need to, you know, I think it's been COVID-19, touch wood, is only going to be the only time that we all experience something like this, but it's clearly identified gaps in lots of companies' supply chains. And I'm not trying to suggest that companies now need to build a supply chain which can deal with such an issue such as COVID-19, because it doesn't happen every day. But, you know, I do believe companies, you know, really do need to, you know, sort of be prioritizing supply chain, you know, not just seeing it as that function that gets products from A to B. And I think, you know, a big way to contribute there is that, you know, supply chain has a seat at the table, shall we say, as part of the sort of senior leadership organisation. Because, you know, as I said before, companies are going to look to their supply chains, I believe, to get business back on track. And if it's never been prioritised as a key function, there's such a gap in between what the leadership think and believe and want to do compared to what supply chain are capable of or can bring to the table.
Right.
I think, Ramon, we should take some questions from the audience before we wrap up. I think you've got a few. Yes, please go ahead.
Yes, I do. Yes. So, so change in mindset from top to the shop. We had a question from a panelist, from a participant asking about if lean supply chain management is about reducing costs and lowering waste, and agile supply chain is built to be highly flexible for the purpose of being able to quickly adapt to changing situations. It seems that this is mutually exclusive, but why can't they be combined? Who would like to answer that question? Can we combine being lean and being agile?
Yeah, this actually hybrid. This again, it's about your supply chain. You know, you need to understand your supply chain. You need to understand the product you deal with. It's not, there is no formula. It's just you understand the type of demand you deal with, and then you respond and apply the strategy you think it will work. So basically, when you have the hybrid strategy, lean and agile, for example, if you work in fashion industry, if you deal with functional products, so this will be basically lean approach, because there is no really big change in the type of demand. This is predictable demand. If you deal also, you can think about actually like Marks and Spencer or Debenhams on this, or maybe even some, I think Zara mainly fashion, but this kind of Marks and Spencer, they have already functional products that their customer used to buy over 20 years or more. So right. This can be lean approach. They don't need to be agile, because the product life cycle is very long. And the question is,
Shereen, can we combine lean and agile? Short answer, yes or no?
Yes.
And how do we do it?
Is a agile. This is basically what I'm saying. So you have both. You deal with both functional and innovative products. So your supply chain can be part. You can also even dealing with the same industry, furniture, for example, for furniture. So the idea of having hybrid strategy is that you have decoupling point. Before this point, all your supply chain is just lean. You don't need to start customization. You only respond to, you move at the coupling point toward the agile when you start receiving the order. Before this point, everything is just more standard.
Okay, so in your existing supply chain, you segment your approach by product type. That means you don't take a uniform approach across your entire supply chain. Thank you very much. Rob, I have a question for you. Great one. What will be the best way to get the demanded skills out of our existing employees, apart from just increasing investment in training? So how do we improve our employees' capability aside from just training them?
Yeah, that is a very good question. I think, training is one thing. Being able to, which I think we touched on, I think looking at giving people opportunity to work on assignments or even transfer internally into different parts of a supply chain. I think in addition, I think it's, if you look from a hiring perspective, historically, a lot of industries have said to me, well, we want somebody from the same industry, but, a good way for somebody to learn and to upskill is to learn from somebody's core competencies within supply chain, but maybe from a different industry and a different angle. Now, of course, it doesn't mean that, all companies can go out and just hire lots of people, but, I believe if you can have a team from different industry backgrounds, then that will help everybody learn. Because although supply chain fundamentals, you could argue, are very similar in terms of what a supply chain looks like, different industries do it very differently.
Okay. Do we have time for one more question?
Yes, we do.
Joe?
Yes, there's a very interesting one on digital. Do you want to ask that one there?
I haven't seen that one yet, but the one that I have from earlier is around global companies have talent management in place, and where are the pitfalls since people still leave and companies look outside for replacement? What's missing here, Rob? Why do people still leave companies, even though they've got talent management programs?
Yeah, well, I think two things on that. I think number one, naturally people will move jobs. You know, that's how the world is. I think, you know, there's so many variables when it comes to people moving, and you know, some people will move from the greatest company in the world with the best talent management scheme out there. You know, it might be personal circumstances or whatever else. You know, that people moving around will always happen. And of course, working in recruitment, I hope that continues to happen. But I think in terms of actually, you know, the talent management side, I think that sometimes organizations will have quite a generic talent management program. So it doesn't maybe address certain functions or certain parts of the business. So it's very much, this is what we do as a business to retain staff. I think, you know, maybe a gap and something that companies can look at is, you know, this is talent management for our supply chain organization. This is talent management for our finance organization. Of course, it takes time and manpower to do that, but, you know, the same as all of us, if we're part of a program which is tailored towards our background, you automatically have more buy-in and commitment to it.
Thanks, Rob, for that answer.
I think
Joe,
yes.
Sorry, Joe, I've got one live question from Bala in Dubai.
Okay.
If you don't mind. Yes.
Absolutely.
Bala, over to you.
Good morning, Dr. Raymond and Joe, and very, very excellent sort of panel of Rob and Dr. Shereen. Good morning. I've got a main point. When we talk about agility of the companies, especially supply chain, when things are going bad like COVID-19, everyone is willing to talk about change, everyone is willing to talk about agility, how we should be flexible. When things were going very good, when stock markets are going high, when your products are being sold very well, managers, do they take the time off in their annual conference and tell the people to say, it is not going to be sunshine throughout your life. There are going to be cloudy days. And this is the way we have got to prepare ourselves in terms of mind management and change management. Rob made a very important point. It's just not enough at the top. It has got to percolate down. So only for normal emergency response planning and safety, people do that, but not for a normal business. That change management cannot be by switching on a light or switching off a light. It has got to be part of the culture there. Those type of companies, I would think, are mature companies. I would love to hear from Rob and Dr. Shereen.
Bala, what's your question? Bala, what is your question exactly?
My question is, should companies really bring in this aspect when things are going very well?
Okay,
On
thank
a
you.
day
That's
when
clear.
you are not shy of talking about a bad day ahead which could come. COVID-19 or a COVID-23, whatever be the number there.
Thank
People
you,
don't
Bala.
want to talk. They want to talk only good things.
Thank you, Bala. So let's start with Rob very briefly on why is change always only discussed when we're in crisis mode?
Yeah, well, I mean, of course, you know, that is in crisis mode. That's always going to be the first response. You know, what can we do better, or we should do this. You know that's human nature. You know, I think successful companies, you know, do address change all the time. You know, in supply chain, you know, it should be a continuous improvement cycle. I feel that companies who stand still and as just asked there, you know, stand still and only change once there's a crisis, well, they're the companies I think will come into great difficulty. It's companies that see continuous improvement as a role of supply chain that needs to be reviewed regularly, and they're the companies that, you know, have strong, solid supply chains and are not equipped to deal with COVID-19, because I don't think really anyone was or is, but they can be a little bit more resilient and can be, linking to a little bit what we've talked about, can be a little bit more agile. So I think continuing is a key.
Thank you, Rob. Dr. Shereen, your view on that?
Yeah, I think it depends on which organization you talk about. It depends on the business maturity level. So how they value things like having plans for risk management or change management. But anyway, this part of the skills that we should require for actually supply chain, which is also short in current supply chain, this change leadership is required and needs to be part of the organizational culture, especially, to be honest, not even before COVID-19, we are in a quite disruptive world with technology, digitization happening every day. So I think it's something really, I agree with you in terms that some things need to be everyday practice, not something just ad hoc event or something.
Dr. Shereen, I fully agree. Change leadership is so vital in business, whether you're in crisis or in normal mode. Okay, it's been a very, very interesting discussion. I just want to ask very quickly one final question to both of you. Effectively, what are the takeaways from this crisis, and how should we develop our skills and defensive strategies moving forward? Very briefly, just to wrap up your thoughts. The takeaways, Dr. Shereen, starting with you, please.
Okay. I think the takeaway is that we need to really build resilience in supply chain, because uncertainty becomes something, it becomes the norm, because it becomes a regular thing. We need to build resilience in supply chain. We need supply chain leaders and their teams needs to conduct scenario planning. So they have the already scenario plan, what if scenarios, and they prepare based on this to develop action plans. This is a time to discover or develop alternative sources and diversify value chains. Also being better prepared than the competition. So this will create opportunities for your business when the disruption comes.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Rob, what is your view on takeaways?
I think that the key word there again is resilience. You know, mentioned already, there's been lots of companies, lots of people I've spoken to that say, wow, you know, going through this has shown that we do have some significant gaps in our supply chain. And I think resilience, I think collaboration, you know, across the supply chain to increase that sort of connectivity, certainly with plants and so on. And I think, you know, the other area is, as I mentioned already, is that prioritization. You know, supply chain is a key part of any organization. And I think that, you know, companies are starting to realize that, you know, and that, I think, moving forwards is, you know, is looking at what supply chain brings as a function.
That's great. Dr. Shereen, Rob, thank you very much for an excellent discussion. We could go on all day talking about these things. I'd like to thank everyone who's connected. At the moment, I can see that 85 people have connected, which is great. And I'm sorry we couldn't take all the questions from the audience or the participants, but thank you very much for connecting. There are some takeaways that I will summarize later on, but clearly the takeaway messages are talking about, I think, change leadership, resilience, collaboration, looking at hybrid tools, not focusing on any single methodology or tool, but looking at hybrid tools to make your product, your business work. It's not a one-fit-all, as Dr. Shereen was saying, but adapting to your business, adapting to your product, adapting to your market. Clearly, the vulnerabilities are many. The most important one is the restriction on traveling, movement, people, because we are losing that connectivity or the face-to-face engagement. But there are opportunities. There are nearshoring, offshore, onshoring possibilities. There are many areas of improvement that we need to work on. So again, there are many, many positives coming out of this, not just negatives. And I think people should be looking at focusing on the areas of improvement. Thank you very much again for sharing these excellent points and for the discussion. And wish you all a good day. Take care and stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Joe. Take care, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.